Robert Clark. Bob Seger is an American rock singer-songwriter, guitarist and pianist. As a locally successful Detroit area artist, he performed and recorded as Bob Seger and the Last Heard and Bob Seger System throughout the 1960s. By the early 1970s, he had dropped the System from his recordings and continued to strive for broader success with other various bands. In 1973, he put together the Silver Bullet Band, a group of Detroit-area musicians, with whom he became most successful on the national level with the album Live Bullet, recorded live with the Silver Bullet Band in 1975 at Cobo Hall in Detroit, Michigan. In 1976, he achieved a national breakout with the studio album Night Moves. On his studio albums, he also worked extensively with the Alabama-based Muscle Shoals rhythm section, which appeared on several of Seger's best-selling singles and albums. A roots rocker with a classic raspy, shouting voice, Seger wrote and recorded songs that dealt with love, women, blue-collar themes and was an exemplar of heartland rock. Seger has recorded many hits, including Night Moves, Turn the Page, We've Got Tonight, Against the Wind, and Shakedown that was written for Beverly Hills Cop 2 and Like a Rock, and also co-wrote the Eagles' #1 hit Heartache Tonight. His iconic recording of old-time rock and roll was named one of the songs of the century in 2001. With a career spanning 5 decades, Seger continues to perform and record today. Seger was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2004 and the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 2012. Early years: Bob Seger was born to Stuart and Charlotte Seger of Dearborn, Michigan, and lived in the area until age 6 when his family moved to nearby Ann Arbor, Michigan. He has an older brother, George. Seger's father, a medical technician for the Ford Motor Company, played several instruments and Seger was exposed to music from an early age. Seger was also exposed to frequent arguments between his parents that disturbed the neighborhood at night. In 1956, when Seger was 10 years old, his father abandoned the family and moved to California. The remaining family soon lost their comfortable middle-class status and struggled financially. Seger attended Tappan Junior High School, and graduated from Pioneer High School in 1963. He ran track and field in high school. Seger also went to Lincoln Park High School for a year. As far as his early musical inspirations are concerned, Seger has stated, Little Richard he was the first one that really got to me. Little Richard and, of course, Elvis Presley. Come Go With Me by the Dell Vikings, a hit in 1957, was the first record he bought. Regional favorite, 1961 1976, The Decibels and the Town Criers. Bob Seger arrived on the Detroit music scene in 1961 fronting a 3-piece band called the Decibels. The band included Seger on guitar, piano, keyboards, and vocals, Pete Stanger on guitar, and H.B. Hunter on drums. All of the members attended Ann Arbor High. The Decibels recorded an acetate demo of a song called The Lonely One, at Del Shannon's studio in 1961. As well as being Seger's first original song, The Lonely One was Seger's first song to be played on the radio, airing only once on an Ann Arbor radio station. After the Decibels disbanded, Seger joined the Town Criers, a 4-piece band with Seger on lead vocals, John Flea on bass, Pep Perrin on drums, and Larry Mason on lead guitar. The Town Criers, covering songs like Louie Louie, began gaining a steady following. Meanwhile, Seger was listening to James Brown and said that, for him and his friends, Live at the Apollo was their favorite record following its release in 1963. Seger was also widely influenced by the music of the Beatles, once they hit American shores in 1964. In general, he and local musician friends such as future Eagle Glenn Frey bought into the premises of 1960s pop and rock radio, with its hook-driven hits. He later recalled he and Frey thinking at the time, "You're nobody if you can't get on the radio." Doug Brown and the Omens. As the Town Criers began landing more gigs, Bob Seger met a man named Doug Brown, backed by a band called the Omens. Seger joined Doug Brown and the Omens, who presumably had a bigger following than the Town Criers. While Doug Brown was the primary lead vocalist for the group, Sega would take the lead on some songs covering R&B numbers. It was with this group that Sega first appeared on an officially released recording, the 1965 single TGIF backed with First Girl, credited to Doug Brown and the Omens. Sega later appeared on Doug Brown and the Omens' parody of Barry Sadler's song Ballad of the Green Berets, which was retitled Ballad of the Yellow Beret, and Mock Draft Dodgers. Soon after its release, Sadler and his record label threatened Brown and his band with a lawsuit, and the recording was withdrawn from the market. While Bob was a member of the Omens, he met his longtime manager Edward "Punch" Andrews, who at the time was partnered with Dave Leone running the Hideout franchise, which consisted of 2 clubs where local acts would play and a small-scale record label. Sega began writing and producing for other acts that Punch was managing, such as the Mama Cats and the Mushrooms. Sega and Doug Brown were then approached by Punch and Leone to write a song for the Underdogs, another local band who recently had a hit with a song called Man in the Glass. Sega contributed a song called East Side Story, which ultimately proved to be a failure for the Underdogs. The last heard, Sega decided to record East Side Story himself, and officially left the Omens. As Bob Seger and the Last Heard, Sega released his version of the song with Hideout Records in January 1966, and it became his first big Detroit hit. The single sold 50,000 copies, mostly in the Detroit area, and led to a contract with Cameo Parkway Records. Though the name The Last Heard originally referred to the collection of Omens and Town Criers who recorded East Side Story with Sega, it soon became the name of Sega's permanent band, which consisted of former Town Crier Pep Perrin on drums, Carl Lugassa on guitar, and Dan Onica on bass. Following East Side Story, the group released 4 more singles: the James Brown-inspired holiday single Sock It to Me Santa, the Dylan-esque Persecution Smith, Vagrant Winter, and perhaps the most notable, Heavy Music, released in 1967. Heavy Music, which sold even more copies than East Side Story, had potential to break out nationally when Cameo Parkway suddenly went out of business. It was actually a top 100 hit in Canada, where it topped out on the national RPM charts at number 82. In the US, it just missed the Hot 100, peaking on the bubbling underchart at number 103. The song would stay in Sega's live act for many years to come. The Bob Seger System. After Cameo Parkway folded, Sega and Punch began searching for a new label. In the spring of 1968, Bob Seger and the Last Heard signed with major label Capitol Records, turning down Motown Records, who offered more money than Capitol. Sega felt that Capitol was more appropriate for his genre than Motown. Capitol changed the name of the band to the Bob Seger System. In the transition between labels, guitarist Carl Lugassa left the band and keyboard player Bob Schultz joined. The System's first single with Capitol was the anti-war message song 2 + 2 =, which reflected a marked change in Sega's political attitudes from the Ballad of the Yellow Beret. The single was again a hit in Detroit and hit number 1 on radio stations in Buffalo, New York and Orlando, Florida, but went unnoticed almost everywhere else, and failed to chart nationally in the US. The single did, however, make the Canadian national charts, peaking at number 79. The second single from the Bob Seger System was Ramblin' Gamblin' Man. It was a major hit in Michigan, but it also became Sega's first national hit, peaking at number 17. The song's success led to the release of an album of the same title in 1969. The Ramblin' Gamblin' Man album reached number 62 on the Billboard Pop Albums chart. It should be noted that Glenn Frey had his first studio gig singing backup on Ramblin' Gamblin' Man. Sega was unable to follow up this success. For the next album, singer-songwriter Tom Nem joined the System, ultimately writing and singing the majority of the tunes featured, for which the group was heavily criticized. The album, called Noah, failed to chart at all, leading Sega to briefly quit the music industry and attend college. He returned the following year and put out the System's final album, 1970's Mongrel, this time without Tom Nem. Bob Schultz left the band as well, being replaced by Dan Watson. Mongrel, with the powerful single Lucifer, was considered to be a strong album by many critics and Detroit fans, but failed to do well commercially. Solo, after Mongrel failed to live up to the success of Ramblin' Gamblin' Man, the system dissipated. For a short period of time following the breakup, Sega had ambitions to be a one-man act. In 1971, Sega released his first solo album, the all-acoustic Brand New Morning. The album was a commercial failure and led to Sega's departure from Capitol Records. Sega, having regained an eye for bands, began playing with the duo Tiergarten and Van Winkle, who in 1970 had a hit single with God, Love and Rock and Roll. Together they recorded Smokin' OPs, released on Punch Andrew's own Palladium Records. The album mainly consisted of covers, spawning a minor hit with a version of Tim Hardin's If I Were a Carpenter, though it did feature Someday, a new Sega original, and a re-release of Heavy Music. The album reached 180 on the Billboard 200. After spending the better part of 1972 touring with Tiergarten and Van Winkle, Sega left the duo to put together a new backing band, referred to as both My Band and the Borneo Band, made up of musicians from Tulsa, Oklahoma. Jamie Oldacre, Dick Sims, and Marcy Levy were all members of My Band before joining Eric Clapton's backing band. In 1974, Sega put out Back in 72, recorded partly with the Shoals rhythm section, a renowned group of session musicians who had recorded with the likes of J.J. Cale and Aretha Franklin. According to Sega, there was a financial misunderstanding with the musicians. They offered to record him for $1,500 a side, which he took to mean $1,500 per album side. When he found out that they meant $1,500 per song, he left after recording 3 songs but resolved to work with them in the future. Back in 72 featured the studio version of Sega's later live classic Turn the Page. Rosalie, a song Sega wrote about CKLW music director Rosalie Trombley. And I've Been Working, a song originally by Van Morrison, a strong influence on Sega's musical development. Despite the strength of Sega's backup musicians, the album only reached 188 on the US charts and has since faded into obscurity. Even so, Back in 72 and its supporting tour marked the beginnings of Sega's long-time relationships with future Silver Bullet band saxophonist Alta Reed, powerhouse female vocalist Shawn Murphy, and the Shoals rhythm section. Over the tour, My Band would prove to be unreliable, which frustrated Sega. By the end of 1973, Sega had left My Band in search of a new backing band. The Silver Bullet Band. In 1974, Sega formed the Silver Bullet Band. Its original members were guitarist Drew Abbott, drummer and backup singer Charlie Allen Martin, keyboard player Rick Manassa, bass guitarist Chris Campbell, and saxophone player Alta Reed. With this new band sitting in occasionally, Sega released the album 7, which contained the Detroit area hard rock hit Get Out of Denver. This track was a modest success and charted at number 80 nationally. In 1975, Sega returned to Capitol Records and released the album Beautiful Loser, with help from the Silver Bullet Band on his cover of the Tina Turner pen Nutbush City Limits. The album's single Kathmandu, which was featured in the 1985 movie Mask starring Cher, in addition to being another substantial Detroit area hit, was Sega's first real national breakout track since Ramblin' Gamblin' Man. Although it just missed the US Pop Top 40 peaking at number 43 the song received strong airplay in a number of markets nationwide including Detroit. In April 1976, Sega and the Silver Bullet Band released the album Live Bullet, recorded over 2 nights in Detroit's Cobo Arena in September 1975. It contained Sega's rendition of Nutbush City Limits as well as Sega's own classic take on life on the road, Turn the Page, from Back in 72. It also included his late 1960s successful releases Heavy Music, and Ramblin' Gamblin' Man. Critic Dave Marsh later wrote that Live Bullet is one of the best live albums ever made. In spots, particularly during the medley of Travelin' Man/Beautiful Loser on side 1, Sega sounds like a man with one last shot at the top. An instant bestseller in Detroit, Live Bullet began to get attention in other parts of the country, selling better than Sega's previous albums, getting progressive rock radio and album-oriented rock airplay, and enabling Sega to headline more shows. Yet still, Sega had a popularity imbalance. In June 1976, he was a featured performer at the Pontiac Silverdome outside Detroit in front of nearly 80,000 fans. The next night, Sega played before fewer than 1,000 people in Chicago. Peak of success, 1976 Euro 1987. Sega finally achieved his commercial breakthrough with his October 1976 album Night Moves. The title song Night Moves was a highly evocative, nostalgic, time-spanning tale that was not only critically praised, but became a number 4 hit single on the Billboard Pop Singles chart as well as a heavy album-oriented rock airplay mainstay. The album also contained Main Street, a number 24 hit ballad that emphasized Sega's heartland rock credentials as well as guitarist Pete Carr's haunting lead guitar. The album also featured the anthem Rock and Roll Never Forgets. Night Moves was Sega's first top 10 album in the Billboard album chart, and as of 2006 was certified at 6 million copies in the United States alone, making it the biggest-selling studio album of his entire career. Furthermore, it activated sales of Sega's recent back catalog, so that Beautiful Loser would eventually sell 2 million and Live Bullet would go on to sell some 5 million copies in the United States. Indeed, Live Bullet stayed on the Billboard charts for 168 weeks and it remains one of the 10 best-selling live albums of all time. The following year, original Silver Bullet drummer Charlie Allen Martin was hit by a car from behind while walking on a service road, and was left unable to walk. David Tiergarten, drummer for Sega on the Smoke in OP's album, replaced him. Despite the loss, Sega followed up strongly with 1978's Stranger in Town. The first single, Still the Same, emphasized Sega's talent for mid-tempo numbers that revealed a sense of purpose, and reached number 4 on the pop singles chart. Hollywood Nights was an up-tempo number 12 hit rocker, while We've Got Tonight was a slow ballad that reached number 13 on the Hot 100. Old Time Rock and Roll, a song from George Jackson and Thomas E. Jones III that Sega substantially rewrote the lyrics for, was not a big pop hit initially, but achieved substantial album track airplay. Moreover, it would later become one of Sega's most recognizable songs following its memorable Tom Cruise dancing in his underwear use in the 1983 film Risky Business. Indeed, it has been ranked the second most played jukebox single of all time, behind Patsy Cline's Crazy. The iconic recording of Old Time Rock and Roll was named one of the songs of the century in 2001. Sega also co-wrote the Eagles' number 1 hit song Heartache Tonight from their 1979 album The Long Run. Their collaboration resulted from Sega and Glenn Frey's early days together in Detroit. In 1980, Sega released Against the Wind and it became his first and only number 1 album on the Billboard album chart. The first single Fire Lake featured Eagles' Don Henley, Timothy B. Schmidt, and Glenn Frey on backing vocals and Muscle Shoals guitarist, Pete Carr, on 12-string acoustic. Fire Lake reached number 6 on the Hot 100, while the title song Against the Wind reached number 5 as a single and even crossed over to the top 10 on Billboard's Adult Contemporary chart. You'll Accompany Me became the third hit single from the record, reaching number 14. Against the Wind would also win 2 Grammy Awards. As of 2006, both Stranger in Town and Against the Wind has sold over 5 million copies each in the United States. The live 1981 album 9 Tonight encapsulated this 3-album peak of Sega's commercial career. Sega's take on Eugene Williams' Trying to Live My Life Without You became a top 5 hit from 9 Tonight and the album would go on to sell 4 million copies. Sega released the acclaimed The Distance in the final days of 1982. During the recording of this album, Silver Bullet guitarist Drew Abbott left the band due to his frustration with Sega's frequent use of session musicians in the studio, and was replaced by Dwayne Bailey. After the album's release, David Tiergarten also left the band due to internal conflict, and was replaced by ex-Grand Funk drummer Don Brewer. Critically praised for representing a more versatile sound than that of his recent material, The Distance spawned numerous hits beginning with Rodney Crowell's Shame on the Moon. It was the biggest hit of the Silver Bullet band's entire career, hitting number 1 on the Adult Contemporary chart and holding at number 2 for 4 consecutive weeks, a euro behind Patti Austin and James Ingram's Baby, Come to Me, and Michael Jackson's Billie Jean, a euro on the Hot 100. It also crossed over to number 15 on Billboard's Country Singles chart. The follow-up single, Even Now, just missed the top 10 and Roll Me Away peaked at number 27. The Driving album track Making Thunderbirds was a popular music video filmed in Detroit and well received on MTV. Sega's multi-platinum sales dropped off at this point, with The Distance peaking at number 5 and selling only 1.9 million copies in the United States. In 1984, Sega wrote and recorded the power rock ballad Understanding for the film soundtrack Teachers. The song was another top 20 hit for Sega in late 1984. In 1986, he wrote and recorded Living Inside My Heart for the film soundtrack of About Last Night. Sega was no longer as prolific and several years elapsed before his next studio album, Like a Rock, emerged in the spring of 1986. The fast-paced American Storm was another top 20 single aided by a popular music video featuring actress Leslie Ann Warren, and Like a Rock followed, reaching number 12 on Billboard's Hot 100. Later, it would become familiar to many Americans through its association with a long-running Chevrolet ad campaign. Sega's 1986–1987 American Storm Tour was his self-stated last major tour, playing 105 shows over 9 months and selling almost 1.5 million tickets. Like a Rock reached number 3 and eventually sold over 3 million copies, although it has never been certified above platinum. The following year, Sega's Shakedown, a somewhat uncharacteristic song off the 1987 film Beverly Hills Cop 2's soundtrack, became his first and only number 1 hit on the pop singles chart. The song had originally been intended for Sega's fellow Detroiter Glenn Frey, but when he lost his voice just prior to the recording session, Frey called on Sega to take his place. Sega changed the verses of the song but kept the chorus the same. The song would earn Sega an Academy Award nomination as co-writer in the Best Original Song category the following year. Later years, 1988 to Euro-present, Bob Seger's next record was 1991's The Fire Inside, at a time when glam metal, grunge and alternative rock were taking the forefront. His new music found little visibility on radio or elsewhere. The same was true of 1995's It's a Mystery, although the album was certified gold. However, In Between His Greatest Hits compilation was his biggest ever record in sales, having sold nearly 10 million copies in the United States as of 2010. Sega did go back on the road again for a 1996 tour, which was successful and sold the 4th largest number of tickets of any North American tour that year. Sega took a sabbatical from the music business for about 10 years to spend time with his wife and 2 young children. In 2001 and 2002, Sega won the prestigious Port Huron to Mackinac boat race aboard his 52-foot sailboat Lightning. He subsequently sold the boat. He was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on March 15, 2004. Fellow Detroiter Kid Rock gave the induction speech and Michigan Governor Jennifer Granholm proclaimed that date Bob Seger Day in his honor. In 2005, Sega was featured singing with Three Doors Down on the song Landing in London from their 17 Days album. Sega's first new album in 11 years, titled Face the Promise, was released in 2006. In its first 45 days, it sold more than 400,000 copies. The album sold over 1.2 million copies, returning Sega to platinum status and staying on the Billboard chart for several months. His supporting tour was also eagerly anticipated, with many shows selling out within minutes. Showing that Sega's legendary appeal in Michigan had not diminished, all 10,834 tickets available for his first show at Grand Rapids Van Andel Arena sold out in under 5 minutes. 3 additional shows were subsequently added, each of which also sold out. In 2009, Sega released a compilation album entitled Early Sega Volume 1, which contained archival material from the 1970s and 1980s, including some fully or partially re-recorded tracks from his album Smokin' OPs and 7 and some never-before-released songs. The album was initially only available for purchase at Muja stores and then later for download at bobseger.com. Sega contributed piano and vocals on Kid Rock's 2010 album Born Free. Sega staged a successful arena tour during 2011, with another 2-CD compilation album, Ultimate Hits, Rock and Roll Never Forgets, slated for release. On May 28, 2011, Michigan Governor Rick Snyder proclaimed that date as Bob Seger Day for his more than 50 years of sharing his celebrated musical talents with fans all over the world. On December 30, 2011, before a sellout crowd at the Mandalay Bay Resort Arena in Las Vegas, Seger closed another successful tour, though it's likely not to be his last. On October 30, 2011, he told AnnArbor.com director Bob Needham he was returning to the studio to complete another new album for release in the fall of 2012, followed by another supporting tour. On June 14, 2012, Seger was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame. On January 10, 2013, Seger announced another tour in the US and Canada. Seger performed a duet of Who'll Stop the Rain with John Fogerty on Fogerty's album Wrote a Song for Everyone, released in 2013. Personal life: Seger's first marriage in 1968 lasted for 1 day short of a year. He had a long-term relationship with Jan Dinsdale from 1972 until 1983. In 1987, he married actress Annette Sinclair and they divorced 1 year later. He married Nita in 1993, and they have 2 children, Samantha and Cole. Seger lives mainly at his home in Orchard Lake Village, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. He frequents many local events including West Bloomfield High School football games to watch his son, who is in the nationally ranked marching band. Seger also has a vacation house near Good Heart, Michigan. He spends most of his winters in Naples, Florida, where he has a condo on the Gulf of Mexico. Discography. See also, List of people from Ann Arbor, Notes. References, 1983 Rolling Stone Record Guide, Joel Hitbune, The Billboard Book of Top 40 Hits, 1983. ISBN 0-8230-7511-7. Joel Hitbune, Top Adult Contemporary 1961 Euro 2001, 2002. ISBN 0-89820-149-7. Stephen Thomas Lewin, Olmasic biographical entry on Bob Seger, Ellen Show, external links, official website, Bob Seger at the Internet Movie Database.